Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Our guest today is Justin Weiss, who is Director of Research at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. He's the author of a book on Barack Obama's foreign policy, and we will indeed talk about Barack Obama's foreign policy in his second mandate. Welcome to you.
Thanks.
And first obvious question, presidents in their second mandates tend to try to make some changes in their foreign policies, trying to burnish their legacy maybe. Do you think this will be the case with Barack Obama?
Yes, and at least for two reasons. The first one is that obviously he has freer hands without the perspective of re-election at the end of his mandate and without the heavy burden of the campaign and fundraising and all that goes with it. And of course, the political constraints also, he has freer hands. And the second reason is foreign policy offers presidents, especially in their second mandate, an opportunity to escape from the intricacies and the tensions and the constant bargaining with Congress in Washington, because foreign policy is an area where the president has simply more power vis-a-vis his internal constraints than domestic policy. And that's why generally presidents do pretty well on foreign policy during the second mandate. Think Ronald Reagan and all the initiatives he took with Mikhail Gorbachev in the 80s. Think Bill Clinton and others. They're just more successful. And so I expect Obama to launch a series of initiatives to, as you say, try to burnish his legacy.
First of all, there might be some personnel changes. We've seen already the CIA director leave because of extramarital affairs. There's talk of Hillary Clinton leaving as Secretary of State, Mr. Panetta as Secretary of Defense. First of all, he'll have to reorganize his national security / foreign policy team.
Yes, however, you know, it's part of the Washington jockeying and horse racing, you know, who will go where. And it's interesting, and I would say it's relevant to some extent to know who will be the next Secretary of State, for example. However, remember that the lesson of the first mandate is that the first advisor to Barack Obama is Barack Obama himself. He's been the decider-in-chief. He's been the strategic mind thinking in the White House. So the decisions were really concentrated in the White House, like under Nixon or Carter, for example. However, the difference is that Barack Obama did not have a Kissinger or a Brzezinski to help him. He was his own man, and he was making the decision both at a general level, like Bush did, but also at a more precise and concrete level. He was really in charge. And so if you want to sort of predict what the second mandate will look like, it's less useful to know who will be Secretary of State than to try to understand how Barack Obama works, how he sees the world, and what he wants to accomplish there.
What do you see him trying to accomplish in his second mandate? You've mentioned initiatives. What do you think is in his mind right now?
Well, I think his first priority would be most probably to try to finish what he calls the pivot. Not only the pivot to Asia, but more generally trying to get away from the wars, the land wars in Asia. So Iraq is finished, he's drawing down in Afghanistan. So I think he wants to see that finished for good in order to redistribute assets vis-a-vis the emerging world or towards the emerging world, towards Asia in particular. I think that's the grand idea of his mandate. Remember that Obama is first and foremost a pragmatist. He's, as Ryan Lisa wrote, a consequentialist. So he decides based on the merits of the case, not out of a set of fixed principles or an ideology. He really is the ultimate pragmatist. But he has a grand idea, which is that you need to reconfigure U.S. leadership after Bush in order to adapt it to the new world, the world that is made of India, Brazil, China. And hence the idea of the pivot and the idea of redistributing assets from the Middle East and from land wars to Asia. And that, I think, he will place an emphasis on and try to see through in his second mandate.
The problem is that he might be dragged down, if I may say, by Middle Eastern realities. and he might have to deal with some of the crises in that region immediately.
It's true. That's the problem with the Middle East, is that you always get sucked back into the problems, the geopolitical problems and realities of the Middle East. And so, however much he wants to pivot away from the Middle East to Asia, yes, he will still have to deal with the Middle East. However, I think he still have a margin of decision or maneuver in order not to overcommit in the Middle East. The example of the rather non-committal position vis-à-vis Syria, so there was help given, non-lethal help given to the rebellion, and diplomatic support and trying to coalesce the Syrian rebellion, but there was no more. And Obama was very careful not to put too much of a finger in that problem for fear of being dragged into it completely. And so that's the idea of the pivot.
That being said, some people are speculating that Barack Obama could decide, because the situation in Syria is descending into chaos, to be maybe more proactive on this issue.
Yes, but once again, I think he's going to be very wary. I think he made a decision in the spring of 2012 not to intervene, to let this thing play out by itself. He thinks that Bashar al-Assad will at some point be destituted, that he will lose, and he might step up help to the rebellion a little bit by helping them coalesce and by giving them, money and communication means, etc. I don't think he will go much further, in spite of all the bad things that are happening in terms of split on or contagion to the neighboring countries, in spite of the radicalization of the rebellion and the cost. I think he has made a strategic decision and he will stick to it.
What about Iran? The nuclear issue was on the hot burner before the election. It's still there. How do you think Obama will deal with Iran?
Well, the clock is ticking, but for the first time in 8 to 10 years, the sanctions that have put in place are biting a bit. So what I think is we might see three possible things. The first option is that the Iranians and the Americans find a way to get back to the negotiating table in some sort of bilateral, direct way, in order for the Iranian regime to save face and manage to find a deal. I think that's unlikely.
A grand bargain.
A grand bargain, but it's possible. And of course, that would be by far the best solution. The second option is that doesn't happen and Iran keeps enriching. And in this case, at mid-2013, there will be a reassessment, and then the chances of an American intervention in Iran, a military intervention, will get higher and possibly quite high at that point, because Obama made it very clear that he would not agree, would not consent to a nuclear Iran. He doesn't think that containment would work. He gave his word. So he's pretty much constrained there.
So you're saying that in this scenario, Obama would not let, quote unquote, the Israelis do the job, but that the Americans would intervene militarily themselves.
The Americans will be dragged into this regardless of who does it. So the calculation, I think, is pretty easy to do, which is that Americans have better do it themselves in order to increase the chances that the nuclear program would be set back sufficiently for the operation to be worth, rather than letting the Israelis do, which would infuriate the rest of the Middle East will then be in a chaos. But if the Israelis alone do it with American consent, it will be worse, including in practical terms, than if Americans do it. So yes, I think he would intervene himself.
And but there is a third scenario.
There's a third scenario, which I think we've seen the beginning of, which was that in August we learned that the Iranians had decided to divert part of their 20% enriched uranium to the Tehran research reactor, which is a medical reactor, sort of signaling to the international community that they were slowing down their efforts to get the nuclear bomb and to enrich uranium. And so if they keep these stalling tactics and try to negotiate and win time, we might see a year or two pass by, because of course Obama will much prefer this solution of no military intervention, even if in the absence of a grand bargain, to a conflagration which could have pretty dire consequences, of which he's very much aware.
On the issue of the Israeli-Palestinian file, Obama, when he arrived, said, "I will not wait until the very end of my mandate to really tackle the issue." He did, he failed. Will he try again?
I don't think he will try again, simply because the conditions are not any more permissive than they were during the second mandate. On the contrary, I would say we probably are going to see a re-election of Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel in January in a coalition with Avigdor Lieberman, and so a pretty right-wing coalition, which I think won't let any space to maneuver for Obama. So I don't see him banging his head on that a second time, except if he's forced to do it, whether by by a happy coincidence of suddenly the Israelis changing government and becoming more open to a deal, and the Palestinians following them, or perhaps by a much less happy scenario of Palestinians erupting in violence once again. That could be possible, or sort of forcing the issue and forcing the hand of Obama. If there is not that, I don't think he will invest much in the Israeli-Palestinian issue.
Just very quickly, and Europe is clearly an afterthought for Barack Obama.
I'm not sure it's an afterthought. You know, it's not a problem except for the Eurozone crisis, but which seems to be sort of under control right now. And it's partly a solution for Obama. In terms of his priorities, we didn't talk about it, but Global Zero, non-proliferation initiative, Europe is important there. Pivoting away from the Middle East and to Asia, Obama needs Europe to step up in the Middle East, and the Sahel, etc. On many issues, Europeans are key to Obama realizing his most cherished goals. So I don't think Europe is just an afterthought for him.
Okay, Justin Weiss, thank you very much for enlightening us on what might happen under Barack Obama too, and thank you for watching this interview here on France 24.